Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my spear. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames.
All right, welcome everybody. Hello, good evening. We are going to finish up this book tonight, The 12th Planet. We have one chapter and the epilogue, basically. So it'll be a little bit longer than normal, but not too bad. We'll finish it up, and then I've already chosen the next book. I'm going to do Forbidden Science next. We've done Forbidden Religion and Forbidden... what was the other one? Forbidden Religion and Forbidden... Crap. Now I can't think of what it was. It's another one in the same series by the same... edited by J. Douglas Kenyon. It's articles from the Atlantis Rising. But anyway, we will jump straight on into this 14th chapter, I think it is. All right, When the Gods Fled from Earth. What was this deluge whose raging waters swept over Earth? Some explain the flood in terms of the annual inundations of the Tigris-Euphrates plain. One such inundation, it is surmised, must have been particularly severe. Fields and cities, men and beasts were swept away from the rising waters, by the rising waters, and primitive people, seeing the event as a punishment by the gods, began to propagate the legend of a deluge. In one of his books, Excavations at Ur, Sir Leonard Woolley relates how in 1929, as the work on the Royal Cemetery at Ur was drawing to a close, the workmen sank a small shaft at a nearby mound, digging through a mass of broken pottery and crumbled brick. 3 feet down they reached a level of hard-packed mud, usually soil marking the point where civilization had started. But could the millennia of urban life have left only 3 feet of archaeological strata? Sir Leonard directed the workmen to dig farther. They went down another 3 feet, then another 5. They still brought up virgin soil, mud with no traces of human habitation. But after digging through 11 feet of silted, dry mud, the workmen reached a stratum containing pieces of broken green pottery and flint instruments. An earlier civilization had been buried under 11 feet of mud. Sir Leonard jumped into the pit and examined the excavation. He called in his aides, seeking their opinions. No one had a plausible theory. Then Sir Leonard's wife remarked almost casually, "Well, of course, it's the flood." After archaeological delegations to Mesopotamia, other archaeological delegations to Mesopotamia, however, cast doubt on this marvelous intuition. The stratum of mud containing no traces of habitation did indicate flooding, but while the deposits of Ur and Al-Abaid suggested flooding sometime between 3500 and 4000 BC, a similar deposit uncovered later at Kish was estimated to have occurred circa 2800 BC. The same date, 2800 BC, was estimated for mud strata found at Erech and Shurupak, the city of the Sumerian Noah. At Nineveh, excavators found at a depth of some 60 feet no less than 13 alternate strata of mud and riverine sand dating from 4000 to 3000 BC. Most scholars, therefore, believe that what Woolley found were traces of diverse local floodings, frequent occurrences in Mesopotamia, where occasional torrential rains and the swelling of the two great rivers and their frequent course changes cause such havoc. All the varying mud strata, scholars have concluded, were not the comprehensive calamity, the monumental prehistoric event that the deluge must have been. The Old Testament is a masterpiece of literary brevity and precision. The words are always well chosen to convey precise meanings. The verses are to the point. Their order is purposeful. Their length is no more than is absolutely needed. It is noteworthy that the whole story from creation through the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden is told in 80 verses. The complete record of Adam and his line, even when told separately from Cain and his line and Seth, Enosh, and their line, is managed in 58 verses. But the story of the Great Flood merited no less than 87 verses. It was, by any editorial standard, a major story. No mere local event, it was a catastrophe affecting the whole of earth, the whole of mankind. The Mesopotamian texts clearly state that the four corners of the earth were affected. As such, it was a crucial point in the prehistory of Mesopotamia. There were the events and the cities and the people before the deluge, and the events and cities and people after the deluge. There were all the deeds of the gods and the kingship that they lowered from heaven before the great flood, and the course of godly and human events when kingship was lowered again to earth after the great flood. It was the great time divider. Not only the comprehensive king list, but also texts relating to individual kings and their ancestries made mention of the deluge. One, for example, pertaining to Ur-Ninurta, recalled the deluge as an event remote in time. Quote, "On that day, on that remote day, on that night, on that remote night, in that year, in that remote year, when the deluge had taken place." End quote. The Assyrian king... Wait a minute. There's a quotation there. Why is there a quotation there? Oh, okay. I see it. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, a patron of the sciences who amassed the huge library of clay tablets in Nineveh, professed in one of his commemorative inscriptions that he had found and was able to read, quote, "stone inscriptions from before the deluge," end quote. An Akkadian text dealing with names and their origins explains lists names that it lists names of kings from after the deluge. A king was exalted as, quote, of seed preserved from before the deluge, end quote. Various scientific texts quoted as their source, quote, the olden sages from before the deluge, end quote. No, the deluge was no local occurrence or periodic inundation. It was, by all accounts, an earth-shaking event of unparalleled magnitude, a catastrophe the likes of which neither man nor gods experienced before or since. The biblical and Mesopotamian texts that we have examined so far leave a few puzzles to be solved. What was the ordeal suffered by mankind, in respect to which Noah was named respite, with the hope that his birth signaled an end to the hardships? What was the secret the gods swore to keep, and of whose disclosure Enki was accused? Why was the launch of a space vehicle from Sipar the signal to Utnapishtim to enter and seal the ark? Where were the gods while the waters covered even the highest mountains? And why did they so cherish the roasted meat sacrifice offered by Noah/Utnapishtim? As we proceed to find the answers to these and other questions, we shall find that the deluge was not a premeditated punishment brought about by the gods at their exclusive will. We shall discover that though the deluge was a predictable event, it was an unavoidable one, a natural calamity in which the gods played not an active but a passive role. We will also show that the secret the gods swore to was a conspiracy against mankind. Oh, I guess we're in an ad. So, I will hang out here until the ad is over. Um, and then I'll pick up that a line up from where I'm at. Should almost be done. A couple more seconds, and then I will get back into it. All right. And why did they, so getting back to it after the ad, and why did they so cherish the roasted meat sacrifice offered by Noah/Utnapishtim? As we proceed to find the answers to these and other questions, we shall find that the deluge was not a premeditated punishment brought about by the gods at their exclusive will. We shall discover that though the deluge was a predictable event, it was an unavoidable one, a natural calamity in which the gods played not an active but a passive role. We will also show that the secret the gods swore to was a conspiracy against mankind, to withhold from the earthlings the information they had regarding the coming avalanche of water, so that while the Nephilim saved themselves, mankind should perish. Much of our greatly increased knowledge of the deluge and the events preceding it comes from the text, quote, when the gods as men, end quote. In it, the hero of the deluge is called Atrahasis. In the deluge segment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enki called Utnapishtim the exceedingly wise, which in Akkadian is Atrahasis. The same name, okay. Scholars theorize that the texts in which Atrahasis is the hero might be parts of an earlier Sumerian deluge story. In time, enough Babylonian, Assyrian, Canaanite, and even original Sumerian tablets were discovered to enable a major reassembly of the Atrahasis epic, a masterful work credited primarily to W. G. Lambert and A. R. Millard in Atrahasis, the Babylonian Story of the Flood. After describing the hard work of the Anunnaki, their mutiny, and the ensuing creation of the primitive worker, the epic relates how man, as we also know from the biblical version, began to procreate and multiply. In time, mankind began to upset Enlil. Quote, The land extended, the people multiplied. In the land like wild bulls they lay. The god got disturbed by their conjunctions. The god Enlil heard their pronouncements, and said the great gods, oppressive have become the pronouncements of mankind. Their conjugations deprive me of sleep. End quote. Enlil, once again cast as the prosecutor of mankind, then ordered a punishment. We would expect to read now of the coming deluge, but not so. Surprisingly, Enlil did not even mention a deluge or any similar watery ordeal. Instead, he called for the decimation of mankind through pestilence and sicknesses. The Akkadian and Assyrian versions of the epic speak of aches, dizziness, chills, fever, as well as disease, sickness, plague, and pestilence, afflicting mankind and its livestock following Enlil's call for punishment. But Enlil's scheme did not work. The, quote, one who was exceedingly wise, end quote, Atrahasis, happened to be especially close to the god Enki. Telling his own story in some of the versions, he says, quote, I am Atrahasis. I lived in the temple of Ea, my lord. With his mind alert to his lord Enki. Oh, sorry, this is multiple little quotes in one sentence. So that was end quote, with quote, his mind alert to his lord Enki, end quote. Atrahasis appealed to him to undo his brother Enlil's plan. Quote, Ea, O Lord, mankind groans, the anger of the gods consumes the land, yet it is thou who hast created us. Let there cease the aches, the dizziness, the chills, the fever. End quote. Until more pieces of the broken off tablets are found, we shall not know what Enki's advice was. He said of something, let there appear in the land, quote unquote. Whatever it was, it worked. Soon thereafter, Enlil complained bitterly to the gods that, quote, the people have not diminished, they are more numerous than before, end quote. He then proceeded to outline the extermination of mankind through starvation. Quote, let supplies be cut off from the people, in their bellies let fruit and vegetables be wanting, end quote. The famine was to be achieved through natural forces, by a lack of rain and failing irrigation. But the rains of the rain god, let the rains of the rain god be withheld from above. Below let the waters not rise from their sources. Let the wind blow and parch the ground. Let the clouds thicken, but hold back the downpour. None of that was listed as a quote, but it looks like it should have been. Even the sources of seafood were to disappear. Enki was ordered to, quote, draw the bolt, bar the sea, end quote, and guard its food away from the people. And then a long quote. Soon the drought began to spread devastation. From above the heat was not, below the waters did not rise from their sources. The womb of the earth did not bear. Vegetation did not sprout. The black fields turned white. The brown plain was choked with salt. End quote. The resulting famine caused havoc among the people. Conditions got worse as time went on. The Mesopotamian text speaks of 6 increasingly devastating sha'atams, a term that some translate as years, but which literally means passings, and as the Assyrian version makes clear, a year of Anu. Quote, for 1 sha'atam they ate the earth's grass, for the 2nd sha'atam they suffered the vengeance. The 3rd sha'atam came, their features were altered by hunger, their faces were encrusted, they were living on the verge of death. When the 4th sha'atam arrived, their faces appeared green. They walked hunched in the streets, their broad shoulders, in parentheses, like it's a missing word, became narrow, end quote. By the 5th passing, human life began to deteriorate. Mothers barred their doors to their own starving daughters. Daughters spied on their mothers to see whether they had hidden any food. By the sixth passing, cannibalism was rampant. Quote, when the sixth Shatam arrived, they prepared the daughter for a meal. The child they prepared for food. One house devoured the other. End quote. The text report the persistent intercession by Atrahasis with his god Enki. Quote, in the house of his god he set foot. Every day he wept, bringing oblations in the morning. He called by the name of his god, seeking Enki's help to avert the famine. End quote. Enki, however, must have felt bound by the decision of the other deities, for at first he did not respond. Quite possibly he even hid from his faithful worshipper by leaving the temple and sailing into his beloved marshlands. When the people were living on the edge of death, quote, when the people were living on the edge of death, Atrahasis placed his bed facing the river, end quote. But there was no response. The sight of a starving, disintegrating mankind, of parents eating their own children, finally brought about the unavoidable, another confrontation between Enki and Enlil. In the seventh passing, when the remaining men and women were, quote unquote, like ghosts of the dead, they received a message from Enki. Quote, make a loud noise in the land, he said, end quote. Set out heralds to command all the people. Quote, do not revere your gods, do not pray to your goddesses, end quote. There was to be total disobedience. Under the cover of such turmoil, Enki planned more concrete action. The texts, quite fragmented at this point, disclose that he convened a secret assembly of elders in his temple. Quote, they took counsel in the house of Enki, end quote. First, Enki exonerated himself, telling them how he had opposed the acts of the other gods. Then he outlined a plan of action. It somehow involved his command of the seas and the lower world. We can glean the clandestine details of the plan from the fragmentary verses. Quote, in the night after someone had to be by the bank of the river at a certain time, perhaps to await the return of Enki from the lower world. So, broken up stuff there. From there, Enki, quote unquote, brought the water warriors. Perhaps also some of the earthlings who were primitive workers in the mines. At the appointed time, commands were shouted, go the order. In spite of missing lines, we can gather that what had happened from the reaction of Enlil. He was filled with anger. He summoned the assembly of the gods and sent his sergeant at arms to fetch Enki. Then he stood up and accused his brother of breaking the surveillance and containment plans. Quote, all of us great Anunnaki reached together a decision. I commanded that in the bird of heaven Adad should guard the upper regions, that Sin and Nergal should guard the earth's middle regions, that the bolt, the bar of the sea, you, Enki, should guard with your rockets, but you let loose provisions for the people. End quote. Enlil accused his brother of breaking the quote-unquote bolt to the sea, but Enki denied that it had happened with his consent. Quote, the bolt, the bar of the sea, I did guard with my rockets, but when escaped from me a myriad of fish, it disappeared. They broke off the bolt. They had killed the guards of the sea, end quote. And some breaks in there. He claimed that he had caught the culprits and punished them, but Enlil was not satisfied. He demanded that Enki, quote, stop feeding his people, end quote, that he no longer, quote, supply corn rations on which the people thrive, end quote. The reaction of Enki was astounding. Quote, the god got fed up with the sitting. In the assembly of the gods, laughter overcame him, end quote. We can imagine the pandemonium. Enlil was furious. There were heated exchanges with Enki and shouting. Quote, There is slander in his hand, end quote. When the assembly was finally called to order, Enlil took the floor again. He reminded his colleagues and subordinates that it had been a unanimous decision. He reviewed the events that led to the fashioning of the primitive worker and recalled the many times that Enki broke the rule, quote unquote. But he said there was still a chance to doom mankind. A killing flood was in the offing. The approaching catastrophe had to be kept a secret from the people. He called on the assembly to swear themselves to secrecy, and most important, to, quote, bind Prince Enki by an oath, end quote. And then going right into another longer quote. Enlil opened his mouth to speak and addressed the assembly of all the gods. Come, all of us, and take an oath. Regarding the killing flood, Anu swore first, Enlil swore, his sons swore with him, end quote. At first, Enki refused to take the oath. Quote, why will you bind me with an oath, he asked. Am I to raise my hands against my own humans, end quote. But he was only forced to take the oath. He was finally forced to take the oath. One of the texts specifically states, quote, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, the gods of heaven and earth, had taken the oath. End quote. The die was cast. What was the oath he was bound by? As Enki chose to interpret it, he swore not to reveal the secret of the coming deluge to the people, but could he not tell it to a wall? Calling Atrahasis to the temple, he made him stay behind a screen. Then Enki pretended to speak not to his devout earthling, but to the wall. Quote, Read screen, he said. Pay attention to my instructions. On all the habitations over the cities a storm will sweep. The destruction of mankind's seed it will be. This is the final ruling, the word of the assembly of the gods, the word spoken by Anu, Enlil, and Ninhursag. End quote. This subterfuge explains Enki's later contention when the survival of Noah/Utnapishtim was discovered that he had not broken his oath, that the exceedingly wise Atrahasis, earthling, had found out the secret of the deluge all by himself by correctly interpreting the signs. Pertinent seal depictions show an attendant holding the screen while Ea, as the serpent god, reveals the secret of to Atrahasis. Okay. Ooh, excuse me. And we have that picture, so I will bring it up and show you the pics. Okay. So here's the serpent god, the screen, this, and the revelation. Okay. Enki's advice to his faithful servant was to build a water-borne vessel, but when the latter said, quote, I have never built a boat, draw for me a design on the ground that I may see, end quote. Enki provided him with precise instructions regarding the boat, its measurements, and its construction. Steeped in Bible stories, we imagine this ark as a very large boat with decks and superstructures, but the biblical term teba stems from the root sunken. It must be concluded that Enki instructed his Noah to construct a submersible boat, a submarine. The Akkadian text quotes Enki as calling for a boat, quote, roofed over and below, end quote, hermetically sealed with tough pitch. There were to be no decks, no openings, quote, so that the sun shall not see inside, end quote. It was to be a boat like an Apsu boat, a sulili. It is the very term used nowadays in Hebrew, soleleth, to denote a submarine. Quote, let the boat, Enki said, be a ma-gur-gur, a boat that can turn and tumble, end quote. Indeed, only such a boat could have survived an overpowering avalanche of waters. The Atrahasis version, like the others, reiterates that although the calamity was only 7 days away, the people were unaware of its approach. Atrahasis used the excuse that the Apsu vessel was being built so that he could leave for Enki's abode and perhaps thereby avert Enlil's anger. This was readily accepted, for things were really bad. Noah's father had hoped that his birth signaled the end of a long time of suffering. The people's problem was a drought, the absence of rain, the shortage of water. Who in his right mind would have thought that they were about to perish in an avalanche of water? Yet if the humans could not read the signs, the Nephilim could. To them, the deluge was not a sudden event. Though it was unavoidable, they detected its coming. Their scheme to destroy mankind rested not on an active, but on a passive role by the gods. They did not cause the deluge, they simply connived to withhold from the earthlings the fact of its coming. Aware, however, of the impending calamity and its global impact, the Nephilim took steps to save their own skins. With Earth about to be engulfed by water, they could go in only one direction for protection, skyward. When the storm that preceded when the storm that preceded the deluge began to blow, the Nephilim took to their shuttlecraft and remained in Earth orbit until the waters began to subside. The day of the deluge, we will show, was the day the gods fled from Earth. The sign for which Utnapishtim had to watch, upon which he was to join all other in the ark and seal it, was this, quote, "When Shamash, who orders a trembling at dusk, will shower down a rain of eruptions, board thou the ship, batten up the entrance." End quote. Shamash, as we know, was in charge of the spaceport at Sippar. There is no doubt in our mind that Enki instructed Utnapishtim to watch for the first sign of space launchings at Sippar. Shuruppak, where Utnapishtim lived, was only 18 Beru, some 180 kilometers or 112 miles, south of Sippar. Since the launchings were to take place at dusk, there would be no problem in seeing the quote-unquote rain of eruptions that the rising rocket ships would shower down. Though the Nephilim were prepared for the deluge, its coming was a frightening experience. Quote, "The noise of the deluge set the gods trembling." End quote. But when the moment to leave Earth arrived, the gods, quote, "shrinking back, ascended to the heavens of Ami." End quote. The Assyrian version of Atrahasis speaks of the gods using Rukub Ilani, chariots of the gods, to escape from Earth. Quote, "The Anunnaki lifted up their rocket ships like torches, setting the land ablaze with their glare." End quote. Orbiting Earth, the Nephilim saw a scene of destruction that affected them deeply. The Gilgamesh texts tell us that as the storm grew in intensity, not only, quote, "could no one see his fellow, but neither could the people be recognized from the heavens." End quote. Crammed into their spacecraft, the gods strained to see what was happening on the planet from which they had just blasted off. Quote, "The gods cowered like dogs, crouched against the outer wall. Ishtar cried out like a woman in travail. The olden days are alas turned to clay. The Anunnaki gods weep with her. The gods, all humbled, sit and weep, their lips drawn tight, one and all." End quote. The Atrahasis texts echo the same theme. The gods fleeing were watching the destruction at the same time, but the situation with their own vessels was not very encouraging either. Apparently, they were divided among several spaceships. Tablet 3 of the Atrahasis epic describes the conditions on board one where some of the Anunnaki share accommodations with the mother goddess. Quote, "The Anunnaki great gods were sitting in thirst, in hunger. Ninti wept and spent her emotion. She wept and eased her feelings. The gods wept with her for the land. She was overcome with grief. She thirsted for beer. Where she sat, the gods sat weeping, crouching like sheep at a trough. Their lips were feverish of thirst. They were suffering cramp from hunger." End quote. The mother goddess herself, Ninhursag, was shocked by the utter devastation. She bewailed what she was seeing. Quote, "The goddess saw and she wept. Her lips were covered with feverishness. My creatures have become like flies. They filled the rivers like dragonflies. Their fatherhood was taken by the rolling sea." End quote. Could she indeed save her own life while mankind, which she helped create, was dying? Could she really leave the earth? She asked aloud. Quote, Shall I ascend up to heaven to reside in the house of offerings where Anu, the Lord, had ordered to go? End quote. The orders to the Nephilim became clear. Abandon earth, ascend up to heaven. It was a time when the 12th planet was nearest Earth, within the asteroid belt, heaven, as evidenced by the fact that Anu was able to attend personally the crucial conferences shortly before the deluge. Enlil and Ninurta, accompanied perhaps by the elite of the Anunnaki, those who had manned Nippur, were in one spacecraft, planning, no doubt, to rejoin the main spaceship. But the other gods were not so determined. Forced to abandon Earth, they suddenly realized how attached they had become to it and its inhabitants. In one craft, Ninhursag and her group of Anunnaki debated the merits of the orders given by Anu. In another, Ishtar cried out, quote, The olden days, alas, are turned into clay. The Anunnaki who were in her craft wept with her. End quote. Enki was obviously in yet another spacecraft, or else he would have disclosed to the others that he had managed to save the seed of mankind. No doubt he had other reasons to feel less gloomy, for the evidence suggests that he had also planned the encounter at Ararat. The ancient versions appeared to imply that the ark was simply carried to the region of Ararat by the torrential waves, and a south storm would indeed drive the boat northward, but the Mesopotamian texts reiterate that Atrahasis/Utnapishtim took along with him a boatman named Puzur Amuri, which means Westerner who knows the secrets. To him, the Mesopotamian Noah, quote, handed over the structure together with its contents, end quote, as soon as the storm started. Why was an experienced navigator needed? Unless it was to bring the ark to a specific destination. The Nephilim, as we have shown, used the peaks of Ararat as landmarks from the very beginning. As the highest peaks in that part of the world, they could be expected to reappear first from under the mantle of water. Since Enki, the wise one, the all-knowing, certainly could figure that much out, we can surmise that he had instructed his servant to guide the ark toward Ararat, planning the encounter from the very beginning. Beriosus's version of the flood, as reported by the Greek Abydenus, relates, quote, Kronos revealed to Xisuthros that there would be a deluge on the 15th day of Daisies, the second month, and ordered him to conceal in Sippar, the city of Shamash, every available writing. Xisuthros accomplished all these things, sailed immediately to Armenia, and thereupon what the god had announced did happen, end quote. Berosus repeats the details regarding the release of the birds. When Xisuthros, which is Atrahasis reversed, not quite, but okay, was taken by the gods to their abode, he explained to the other people in the ark that they were in Armenia, and directed them back on foot to Babylonia. We find in this version not only the tie-in with Sippar, the spaceport, but also confirmation that Xisuthros was instructed to, quote, sail immediately to Armenia, end quote, to the land of Ararat. As soon as Atrahasis had landed, he slaughtered some animals and roasted them on a fire. No wonder that the exhausted and hungry gods, quote, gathered like flies over the offering, end quote. Suddenly they realized that man and the food he grew and the cattle he raised were essential. Quote, when at length Enlil arrived and saw the ark, he was wroth, end quote. But the logic of the situation and Enki's persuasion prevailed. Enlil made his peace with the remnants of mankind and took Atrahasis/Utnapishtim in his craft up to the eternal abode of the gods. Another factor in the quick decision to make peace with mankind may have been the progressive abatement of the flood and the reemergence of dry land and the vegetation upon it. We have already concluded that the Nephilim became aware ahead of time of the approaching calamity, but it was so unique in their experience that they feared that Earth would become uninhabitable forever. As they landed on Ararat, they saw that this was not so. Earth was still habitable, and to live on it they needed man. What was this catastrophe, predictable by yet unavoidable? An important key to unlocking the puzzle of the deluge is the realization that it was not a single sudden event, but the climax of a chain of events. Unusual pestilences affected man and beasts, and a severe drought preceded the ordeal by water, a process that lasted, according to the Mesopotamian sources, 7 passings or sars. These phenomena could be accounted for only by major climactic changes. Such changes have been associated in Earth's past with the recurring ice ages and interglacial stages that had dominated Earth's immediate past. Reduced precipitation, falling sea and lake levels, and the drying up of subterranean water sources have been the hallmarks of an approaching ice age. Since the deluge that abruptly ended those conditions was followed by the Sumerian civilization and our own present post-glacial age, the glaciation in question could only have been the last one. Our conclusion is that the events of the deluge relate to Earth's last ice age and its catastrophic ending. Drilling into the Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets, scientists have been able to measure the oxygen trapped in the various layers and to judge from that the climate that prevailed millennia ago. Core samples from the bottoms of the seas, such as the Gulf of Mexico, measuring the proliferation or dwindling of marine life, likewise enable them to estimate temperatures in ages past. Based on such findings, scientists are now certain that the last ice age began some 75,000 years ago and underwent a mini-warming some 40,000 years ago. Circa 38,000 years ago, a harsher, colder, and drier period ensued, and then, about 13,000 years ago, the ice age abruptly ended and our present mild climate was ushered in. 13,000 years ago, so yeah, about 11,500 BC. The end of the Younger Dryas. And I don't think he would have known about that in the 70s when he wrote this. Aligning the biblical and Sumerian information, we find that the harsh times, the accursation of earth, began in the time of Noah's father Lamech. His hopes that the birth of Noah, respite, would mark the end of the hardships was fulfilled in an unexpected way through the catastrophic deluge. Many scholars believe that the 10 biblical pre-diluvial patriarchs, Adam to Noah, somehow parallel the 10 pre-diluvial rulers of the Sumerian king lists. These lists do not apply to divine titles. Din, Gir, or En to the last 10 do not apply to divine. Okay, or N, to the last 2 of the 10, and treat Ziasudra / Utnapishtim and his father Ubartutu as men. The later 2 parallel Noah and his father Lamech, and according to the Sumerian lists, the 2 reigned a combined total of 64,800 years until the deluge occurred. The last ice age, from 75,000 to 13,000 years ago, lasted 62,000 years, since the hardships began when Ubartutu / Lamech was already reigning. The 62,000 fit perfectly into the 64,800. Moreover, the extremely harsh conditions lasted, according to the Atrahasis epic, 7 shars, or 25,200 years. The scientists discovered evidence of an extremely harsh period from circa 38,000 to 13,000 years ago, a span of 25,000 years. Once again, the Mesopotamian evidence and modern scientific findings corroborate each other. Our endeavor to unravel the puzzle of the deluge then focuses on Earth's climactic changes, and in particular the abrupt collapse of the Ice Age some 13,000 years ago. What could have caused a sudden climactic change of such magnitude? Of the many theories advanced by the scientists, we are intrigued by the one suggested by Dr. John T. Holland of the University of Maine. He contended that the Antarctic ice sheet periodically breaks loose and slips into the sea, creating an abrupt and enormous tidal wave. This hypothesis, accepted and elaborated upon by others, suggests that as the ice sheet grew thicker and thicker, it not only trapped more of Earth's heat beneath the ice sheet, but also created, by pressure and friction, a slushy, slippery layer at its bottom, acting as a lubricant between the thick ice sheet above and the solid Earth below. This slushy layer sooner or later caused the ice sheet to slide into the surrounding ocean. Holland calculated that if only half the present ice sheet of Antarctica, which is on the average more than a mile in thickness, were to slip into the southern seas, the immense tidal wave that would follow would raise the level of all the seas around the globe by some 60 feet, inundating coastal cities and lowlands. In 1964, A.T. Wilson of Victoria University in New Zealand offered the theory that ice ages ended abruptly in such slippages, not only in the Antarctic but also in the Arctic. We feel that the various texts and facts gathered by us justify a conclusion that the deluge was the result of such a slippage into the Antarctic waters of billions of tons of ice, bringing an abrupt end to the last ice age. The sudden event triggered an immense tidal wave. Starting in Antarctic waters, it spread northward toward the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. The abrupt change in temperature must have created violent storms accompanied by torrents of rain. Moving faster than the waters, the storms, clouds, and darkened skies heralded the avalanche of waters. Exactly such phenomena are described in the ancient texts. As commanded by Enki, Atrahasis sent everybody aboard the ark, while he himself stayed outside to await the signal for boarding the vessel and sealing it off. Providing a human interest detail, the ancient texts tell us that Atrahasis, though ordered to stay outside the vessel, quote, was in and out. He could not sit, could not crouch. His heart was broken. He was vomiting gall. End quote. But then, quote, the moon disappeared, the appearance of the weather changed, the rains roared in the clouds, the winds became savage, the deluge set out. Its might came upon the people like a battle. One person did not see another. They were not recognizable in the destruction. The deluge bellowed like a bull, the winds whinnied like a wild ass. The darkness was dense, the sun could not be seen. End quote. The Epic of Gilgamesh is specific about the direction from which the storm came. It came from the south. Clouds, winds, rain, and darkness indeed preceded the tidal wave which first tore down the posts of Nergal in the lower world. Quote, with the glow of dawn, a black cloud arose from the horizon. Inside it, the god of storms thundered. Everything that had been bright turned to blackness. For one day the south storm blew. Gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains. 6 days and 6 nights blows the wind. As the south storm sweeps the land, when the 7th day arrived, the deluge of the south storm subsided. End quote. The references to the south storm, south wind, clearly indicate the direction from which the deluge arrived. It's clouds and winds, the heralds of the storm, moving over hill and plain, quote unquote, to reach Mesopotamia. Indeed, a storm and an avalanche of water originating in the Antarctic would reach Mesopotamia via the Indian Ocean after first engulfing the hills of Arabia, then inundating the Tigris-Euphrates plain. The Epic of Gilgamesh also informs us that before the people and their land were submerged, the quote-unquote dams of the dry land and its dikes were torn out. The continental coastlines were overwhelmed and swept over. The biblical version of the deluge story reports that the bursting of the fountains of the great deep preceded the opening of the sluices of heaven. And those are both two short quotes. Pause. First, the waters of the great deep, what a descriptive name for the southernmost frozen Antarctic seas, broke loose out of their icy confinement. Only then did the rains begin to pour from the skies. This confirmation of our understanding of the deluge is repeated in reverse when the deluge subsided. First, the quote-unquote foundations of the deep were dammed. Then the rain quote-unquote was arrested from the skies. After the first immense tidal wave, its waters were still, quote, coming and going back, end quote, in huge waves. I don't know why I keep yawning. I'm talking too much. That's what it is. Then the waters began to go back, and quote unquote, they were less. After 150 days, when the ark came to rest between the peaks of Ararat, the avalanche of water, having come from the southern seas, went back to the southern seas. How could the Nephilim predict when the deluge would burst out of Antarctica? The Mesopotamian texts we know related to the deluge and the climatic changes preceding it to 7 passings, undoubtedly meaning the periodic passage of the 12th planet in Earth's vicinity. We know that even the moon, Earth's small satellite, exerts sufficient gravitational pull to cause the tides. Both Mesopotamian and biblical texts describe how the earth shook when the celestial Lord passed in Earth's vicinity. Could it be that the Nephilim, observing the climate changes and the instability of the Antarctic ice sheet, realized that the next 7th passing of the 12th planet would trigger the impending catastrophe? Ancient texts show that it was so. The most remarkable of these is a text of some 30 lines inscribed in miniature cuneiform writing on both sides of a clay tablet less than an inch long. It was unearthed at Ashur, but the profusion of Sumerian words in the Akkadian text leaves no doubt as to its Sumerian origin. Dr. Eric Ebeling determined that it was a hymn recited to the house of the dead, and he therefore included the text in his masterwork Tod und Leben on death and resurrection in ancient Mesopotamia. On close examination, however, we find that the composition, quote, called on the names of the celestial lords, the 12th planet. There is a end quote there, hard to see. Called on the names is the whole quote of the celestial lord, the 12th planet. It elaborates the meaning of the various epithets by relating them to the passage of the planet at the site of the battle with Tiamat, a passage that causes the deluge. The text begins by announcing that, for all its might and size, the planet, the hero, nevertheless orbits the sun. The deluge was the weapon of this planet. Quote, his weapon is the deluge, God whose weapon brings death to the wicked, supreme, anointed, who, like the sun, the lands crosses, the sun his God he frightens, end quote. Calling out the first name of the planet, which unfortunately is illegible, the text describes the passage near Jupiter toward the site of the battle with Tiamat. Quote, first name, placeholder there, who the circular band hammered together, who the occupier split in two, poured her out, Lord, who at Akiti time within Tiamat's battle place reposes, whose seed are the sons of Babylon, who by the planet Jupiter cannot be distracted, who by his glow shall create. End quote. Coming closer, the 12th planet is called Shildig. Ludig, meaning powerful leader of the joyous planets, seems like something's missing there. It is now nearest to Mars. By the brilliance of the god, oh, quote, by the brilliance of the god planet Anu, god planet Lamu, Mars is clothed, end quote. Then it loosed the deluge upon the earth. Quote, this is the name of the Lord, who from the second month to the month Adar, the waters had summoned forth. End quote. The text's elaboration of the two names offers remarkable calendarial information. The 12th planet passed Jupiter and neared Earth at Akiti time, when the Mesopotamian New Year began. By the second month, it was closest to Mars. Then, quote, from the second month to the month Adar, the 12th month, it loosed the deluge from Earth, end quote. This is in perfect harmony with the biblical account, which states that, quote, the fountains of the great deep burst open, end quote, on the 17th day of the second month. The ark came to rest on Ararat in the 7th month. Other dry land was visible in the 10th month, and the deluge was over in the 12th month. For it was on, quote, the first day of the first month, end quote, of the following years that Noah opened the ark's hatch. Shifting to the second phase of the deluge, when the waters began to subside, the text calls the planet Shulpakunne. Quote, hero supervising Lord who collected together the waters, who by gushing waters the righteous and wicked cleanses, who in the twin-peaked mountain arrested the break, fish, river, the flooding rested. In the mountain land on a tree a bird rested, by which break said. End quote. I'm saying break where there's a break, if that wasn't obvious. I'm sure it is, but I have to say it anyway. In spite of the illegibility of some damaged lines, the parallels with the biblical and other Mesopotamian deluge tales is evident. The flooding had ceased. The ark was arrested on the twin-peaked mountain. The rivers began to flow again from the mountaintops and carry the waters back to the oceans. Fish were seen. A bird was sent out from the ark. The ordeal was over. The 12th planet had passed its crossing, quote unquote. It had neared Earth and it began to move away, accompanied by its satellites. Quote, when the savant shall call out flooding, it is the god Nibiru, planet of crossing. It is the hero, the planet with 4 heads, the god whose weapon is the flooding storm, shall turn back. To his resting place he shall lower himself. End quote. The receding planet, the text asserts, then recrossed the path of Saturn in the month of Ululu, the 6th month of the year. The Old Testament frequently refers to the time when the Lord caused earth to be covered by the waters of the deep. The 29th Psalm describes the calling as well as the return of the great waters by the Lord. Quote, unto the Lord, ye sons of the gods, give glory, acknowledge might. The sound of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory, the Lord, thundereth upon the great waters. The Lord's sound is powerful. The Lord's sound is majestic. The Lord's sound breaketh the cedars. He makes Mount Lebanon dance as a calf. Mount Sirion leap like a young bull. The Lord's sound strikes fiery flames. The Lord's sound shaketh the desert. The Lord of the deluge said, return. The Lord as king is enthroned forever. End quote. In the magnificent Psalm 77, Aloud to God I Cry, the psalmist recalls the Lord's appearance and disappearance in earlier times. Quote, I have calculated the olden ways, the years of Olam. I shall recall the Lord's deeds, remember thy wonders in antiquity. Thine course, O Lord, is determined. No God is as great as the Lord. The waters saw thee, O Lord, and shuddered. Thine splitting sparks went forth. The sound of thine thunder was rolling. Lightnings lit up the world. The earth was agitated, and it quaked. Then in the waters was thy course, thine paths in the deep waters, and thine footsteps were gone unknown. End quote. He's got a bunch of psalms here. Well, a bunch, I should say. He's got two more. Psalm 104, exalting the deeds of the celestial Lord, recalled the time when the oceans overran the continents and were made to go back. Quote, Thou didst fix the earth in constancy, for ever and ever to be unmoved. With the oceans as with garment, thou coveredst it. Above the mountains did the waters stand. At thy rebuke the waters fled. At the sound of thine thunder they hastened away. They went upon the mountains, they went down to the valleys, upon the place which thou hast founded for them. A boundary thou hast set, not to be passed over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. End quote. The words of the prophet Amos are even more explicit. Quote, Woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord! To what end is it for you? For the day of the Lord is darkness and no light, turneth morning unto death's shadow, maketh the day dark as night, calleth forth the waters of the sea, and poureth them upon the face of the earth. End quote. These, then, were the events that took place in olden days, quote unquote. The day of the Lord, quote unquote, was the day of the deluge. We've already shown that having landed on earth, the Nephilim associated the first rains in the first cities with the zodiacal ages, giving the zodiacs the epithets of the various associated gods. We now find that the text uncovered by Ebeling provided calendarial information not only for men but also for the Nephilim. The deluge, it informs us, occurred in the quote-unquote age of the constellation Lion. Quote, Supreme, supreme, anointed, Lord whose shining crown with terror is laden, supreme planet, a seat he has set up, facing the confined orbit of the red planet, Mars. Daily within the Lion he is afire, his light, his bright kingships on the lands pronounces. End quote. We can now also understand an enigmatic verse in the New Year's rituals stating that it was, quote, the constellation Lion that measured the waters of the deep, end quote. These statements place the time of the deluge within a definite framework, as though astronomers nowadays cannot precisely ascertain where the Sumerians set the beginning of a zodiacal house. The following timetable for the ages is considered accurate. And he has a list. 60 BC to AD 2100, Age of Pisces, 2220 BC to 60 BC, Age of Aries, 4380 BC to 2220 BC, Age of Taurus, 6540 BC to 4380 BC, Age of Gemini, 8700 BC to 6540 BC, Age of Cancer, 10,860 BC to 8700 BC, Age of the Lion. If the deluge occurred in the Age of the Lion, or sometime between 10,860 BC and 8700 BC, then the date of the deluge falls well within our timetable. According to modern science, the last ice age ended abruptly in the southern hemisphere some 12 to 13,000 years ago, and in the northern hemisphere 1 or 2,000 years later. The zodiacal phenomenon of precession offers even more comprehensive corroboration of our conclusions. We concluded earlier that the Nephilim landed on Earth 432,000 years, 120 shars, before the deluge in the age of Pisces. In terms of the precessional cycle, 432,000 years comprise 16 full cycles, or great years, and more than halfway through another great year into the age of the constellation of the Lion. We can now reconstruct the complete timetable for the events embraced by our findings. And there is a list. I'll read it off. That ends the chapter. I'm going to take a quick break, get some more water because I'm almost out, and then we'll read the conclusion of the book. So here is the list. Years ago event. 450,000, the Nephilim, led by Enki, arrive on Earth from the 12th planet, Eridu. Eridu Earth Station is established in southern Mesopotamia. 430,000, the great ice sheets begin to recede, a hospitable climate in the Near East. 415,000, Enki moves inland, establishes Larsa. 400,000, the great interglacial period spreads globally. Enlil arrives on Earth, establishes Nippur as mission control center. Enki establishes sea routes to southern Africa, organizes gold mining operations. 360,000, the Nephilim establish Bad Tibira as their metallurgical center for smelting and refining. Sipar, the spaceport, and other cities of the gods are built. 300,000, the Anunnaki mutiny. Man, the primitive worker, is fashioned by Enki and Ninhursag. 250,000, early Homo sapiens multiply, spread to other continents. 200,000, life on Earth regresses during new glacial period. 100,000, climate warms again. The sons of the gods take the daughters of man as wives. 77,000, Ubartutu/Lamech, a human of divine parentage, assumes the reign in Shurupak under the patronage of Ninhursag. 75,000, the accursation of Earth, a new ice age begins. Regressive types of man roam Earth. 49,000, the reign of Ziusudra, Noah, a faithful servant of Enki, begins. 38,000, the harsh climactic period of the seven passings begins to decimate mankind. Earth's Neanderthal, man disappears. Only Cro-Magnon man, based in the Near East, survives. Enlil, disenchanted with mankind, seeks its demise. 13,000, the Nephilim, aware of the impending tidal wave that will be triggered by the nearing 12th planet, vow to let mankind perish. The deluge sweeps over Earth, abruptly ending the Ice Age. And that is the end of that chapter. So we've got 12 pages, but there are a lot of pictures in this next. It's fairly short, should go fairly quick, but I need to take a break. So I will be back in a few minutes, and we'll finish it up.
Prepare to die. Prepare to die. Prepare to die. Prepare to die. Welcome to a whole new world. Your planet is now under Mid-Ranger's control. Humanity will be exterminated. If you hear this message, do not try to leave. Do not try to fight. Do not try to resist. You will be eliminated. You will be eliminated. Prepare to die. Prepare to die. Prepare to die. Prepare to die. Welcome to a whole new world. Your planet is now under mid-rangers' control. Humanity will be exterminated. If you hear this message, do not try to leave. Do not try to fight. Do not try to resist. You will be eliminated. You will be eliminated. Prepare to die. Prepare to die.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about the delay. Get to the right screen here. Okay, sorry about that. My very quick go get some water break turned into, what, 10 minutes? It happens sometimes. All right, so we're in the home stretch. Kingship on Earth. The deluge, a traumatic experience for mankind, was no less so for the gods, the Nephilim. In the words of the Sumerian king lists, quote, the deluge had swept over, end quote, and an effort of 120 shars was wiped away overnight. The South African mines, the cities in Mesopotamia, the control center at Nippur, the spaceport at Sipar, all lay buried under water and mud. Hovering in their shuttlecraft above devastated Earth, the Nephilim impatiently awaited the abatement of the waters so that they could set foot again on solid ground. How were they going to survive henceforth on Earth when their cities and facilities were gone, and even their manpower? mankind was totally destroyed. When the frightened, exhausted, and hungry groups of Nephilim finally landed on the peaks of the quote-unquote Mount of Salvation, they were clearly relieved to discover that man and beast alike had not perished completely. Even Enlil, at first enraged to discover that his aims had been partly frustrated, soon changed his mind. The deity's decision was a practical one. Faced with their own dire conditions, the Nephilim cast aside their inhibitions about man, rolled up their sleeves, and lost no time in imparting to man the arts of growing crops and cattle, since survival, no doubt, depended on the speed with which agriculture and animal domestication could be developed to sustain the Nephilim and a rapidly multiplying mankind. The Nephilim applied their advanced scientific knowledge to the task. Unaware of the information that could be culled from the biblical and Sumerian text, many scientists who have studied the origins of agriculture have arrived at the conclusion that its discovery by mankind came some 13,000 years ago, was related to the neothermal newly warm Elimalti that followed the end of the last ice age. Long before modern scholars, however, the Bible also related the beginnings of agriculture to the aftermath of the deluge. Sowing and harvesting, quote unquote, were described in Genesis as divine gifts granted to Noah and his offspring as part of the post-diluvial covenant between the deity and mankind. Quote, "For as long as the earth's days shall be, there shall not cease sowing and harvesting, cold and warmth, summer and winter, day and night." End quote. Having been granted the knowledge of agriculture, quote, "Noah as a husbandman was first, and he planted a vineyard." End quote. Well, he had his priorities straight, huh? He wanted that wine. He became the first post-diluvial farmer engaged in the deliberate, complicated task of planting. The Sumerian texts, too, ascribed to the gods the granting to mankind of both agriculture and the domestication of animals. Tracing the beginnings of agriculture, modern scholars have found that it appeared first in the Near East, but not in the fertile and easily cultivated plains and valleys. Rather, agriculture began in the mountains, skirting the low-lying plains in a semicircle. Why would farmers avoid the plains and limit their sowing and reaping to the more difficult mountainous terrain? The only plausible answer is that the low-lying lands were, at the time when agriculture began, uninhabitable. 13,000 years ago, the low-lying areas were not yet dry enough following the deluge. Millennia passed before the plains and valleys had dried sufficiently to permit the people to come down from the mountains surrounding Mesopotamia and to settle the low-lying plains. This indeed is what the book of Genesis tells us. Many generations after the deluge, people arriving from the east, quote unquote, from the mountainous areas east of Mesopotamia, quote, found a plain in the land of Shinar, Sumer, and settled there, end quote. The Sumerian texts state that Enlil first spread cereals, quote, in the high country, end quote, in the mountains, not in the plains, and that he made cultivation possible in the mountains by keeping the floodwaters away. Quote, he barred the mountains as with a door, end quote. The name of this mountainous land east of Sumer, Elam, meant house where vegetation germinated. Later, two of Enlil's helpers, the gods Ninadzu and Ninmada, extended the cultivation of cereals to the low-lying plains so that eventually, quote, Sumer, the land that knew not grain, came to know grain, end quote. Scholars who have now established that agriculture began with the domestication of wild emmer as a source of wheat and barley are unable to explain how the earliest grains, like those found in the Shanidar cave, were already uniform and highly specialized. Thousands of generations of genetic selection are needed by nature to acquire even a modest degree of sophistication. Yet the period, time, or location in which such a gradual and very prolonged process might have taken place on Earth are nowhere to be found. There is no explanation for this botανogenic miracle unless the process was not one of natural selection but of artificial manipulation. Hey Vesper, how you doing tonight? Thank you for coming in. We are finishing up this book finally. We're in just the last few pages here. So it's been good, and I'm ready to be done with the book. I'm enjoying it, but I'm ready to be done. Let's see, where was I? Artificial manipulation. Spelt, a hard-grained type of wheat, poses an even greater mystery. It is the product of, quote, an unusual mixture of botanic genes, end quote. Neither a development from one genetic source nor a mutation of one source. It is definitely the result of mixing the genes of several plants. The whole notion that man, in a few thousand years, changed animals through domestication is also questionable. Modern scholars have no answers to these puzzles, nor to the general question of why the mountainous semicircle in the ancient Near East became a continuous source of new varieties of cereals, plants, trees, fruits, vegetables, and domesticated animals. The Sumerians knew the answer. The seeds, they said, were a gift sent to earth by Anu from his celestial abode. Wheat, barley, and hemp were lowered to earth from the 12th planet. Agriculture and the domestication of animals were gifts given to mankind by Enlil and Enki, respectively. So hemp was a gift from the gods. I know a few potheads that would agree with that. Not only the presence of the Nephilim, but also the periodic arrivals of the 12th planet in Earth's vicinity seem to lie behind the three crucial phases of man's post-diluvial civilization. Agriculture, circa 11,000 BC, the Neolithic culture, circa 7,500 BC, and the sudden civilization of 3,800 BC took place at intervals of 3,600 years. It appears that the Nephilim, passing knowledge to man in measured doses, did so in intervals matching the periodic returns of the 12th planet to Earth's vicinity. It was as though some on-site inspection, some face-to-face consultation, possible only during the window period that allowed landings and takeoffs between Earth and the 12th planet, had to take place among the gods before another go-ahead could be given. The Epic of Etana provides a glimpse of the deliberations that took place in the days that followed the deluge. It says, quote, the great Anunnaki who decree the fate sat exchanging their counsels regarding the land. They who created the four regions, who set up the settlements, who oversaw the land, were too lofty for mankind, end quote. The Nephilim, we are told, reached the conclusion that they needed an intermediary between themselves and the masses of humans. They decided, to be gods. Elu in Akkadian, meaning lofty ones. As a bridge between themselves as lords and mankind, they introduced kingship on earth, appointing a human ruler who would assure mankind's service to the gods and channel the teachings and laws of the gods to the people. A text dealing with the subject describes the situation before either tiara or crown had been placed on a human head, or scepter handed down. All these symbols of kingship, plus the shepherd's crook, the symbol of righteousness and justice, quote, lay deposited before Anu in heaven, end quote. After the gods had reached their decision, however, quote, kingship descended from heaven, end quote, to earth. Both Sumerian and Akkadian texts state that the Nephilim retained the lordship over the lands and had mankind first rebuild the pre-diluvial cities exactly where they had originally been and as they had been planned. Quote, let the bricks of all the cities be laid on the dedicated places. Let all the bricks rest on holy places, end quote. Eridu then was the first to be rebuilt. The Nephilim then helped the people plan and build the first royal city, and they blessed it. Quote, "May the city be the nest, the place where mankind shall repose. May the king be a shepherd." End quote. The first royal city of man, the Sumerian texts tell us, was Kish. Quote, "When kingship, excuse me, when kingship was lowered again from heaven, the kingship was in Kish." End quote. The Sumerian king lists, unfortunately, are mutilated just where the name of the very first human king was inscribed. We do know, however, that he started a long line of dynasties whose royal abode changed from Kish to Uruk, Ur, Awan, Hamazi, Aksak, Akkad, and then to Ashur and Babylon and more recent capitals. The biblical Table of Nations likewise listed Nimrod, the patriarch of the kingdoms at Uruk, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, as descended from Kish. It records the spread of mankind, its lands and kingships, as an outgrowth of the division of mankind into three branches following the deluge. Descended from the named after the three sons, descended from and named from the three sons of Noah. These were the peoples and lands of Shem, who inhabited Mesopotamia and the Near Eastern lands, Ham, who inhabited Africa and parts of Arabia, and Japheth, the Indo-Europeans in Asia Minor, Iran, India, and Europe. These three broad groupings were undoubtedly three of the regions whose settlement was discussed by the great Anunnaki. Each of the three was assigned to one of the leading deities. One of these was, of course, Sumer itself, the region of the Semitic peoples, the place where man's first great civilization arose. The other two also became sites of flourishing civilizations. Circa 3200 BC, about a half a millennium after the blooming of the Sumerian civilization, statehood, kingship, and civilization made their first appearance in the Nile Valley, leading in time to the great civilization of Egypt. Nothing was known until some 50 years ago, again he's writing in the 70s, 50 years ago, about the first major Indo-European civilization, but by now it is well established that an advanced civilization encompassing large cities, a developed agriculture, a flourishing trade, existed in the Indus Valley in ancient times. It came into being, scholars believe, some 1,000 years after the Sumerian civilization began. Ancient texts as well as archaeological evidence attest to the close cultural and economic links between these two river valley civilizations and the older Sumerian one. And we have a map. I'm going to go ahead and switch to and bring it up here. I'll show you. So, Valle del Nilo, so the Valley of the Nile, Baja Mesopotamia, Indo. I don't know what language all that's in, but it's not English. But anyway, you can see it's a simple map of that part of the world. Here's Tigris and Euphrates and the Nile, and I don't know what river that is, but this is India. So anyway, back to it. Moreover, both direct and circumstantial evidence has convinced most scholars that the civilization of the Nile and Indus not only were linked to, but were actually offspring of the earlier civilization of Mesopotamia. The most imposing monuments of Egypt, the pyramids, have been found to be under a stone skin, simulations of the Mesopotamian ziggurats, and there is reason to believe that the ingenious architect who designed the plans for the Great Pyramids and supervised their construction was a Sumerian venerated as a god. And we have another picture, probably not entirely accurate, but we'll go with it, um, of a pyramid with a ziggurat structure kind of in it. You'll see what I mean. Um, Screen, let me blow that up a bit. So he's even got the stairs here. If you ever seen a ziggurat, it is a stepped pyramid with usually external stairs going all the way up to the summit on usually just one side as far as I am aware. Um, and he's showing that here. So, not sure that's entire. I don't think that's accurate at all, but he thought it was accurate back in the 76 when he was writing this. The ancient Egyptian name for their land was the raised land, and their prehistoric memory was that, quote, a very great God who came forth in the earliest times, end quote, found their land lying under water and mud. He undertook great works of reclamation, literally raising Egypt from under the waters. The legend neatly describes the low-lying valley of the Nile River in the aftermath of the deluge. This olden god, it can be shown, was none other than Enki, the chief engineer of the Nephilim. Though relatively little is known as yet regarding the Indus Valley civilization, we do know that they too venerated the number 12 as the supreme divine number, that they depicted their gods as human-looking beings wearing horned headdresses, and that they reversed the symbol of the cross, the sign of the 12th planet. Revered the symbol of the cross, the sign of the 12th planet. And then we have two more pictures. If these two civilizations were of Sumerian origin, why were their written languages different? Okay, let me go ahead and go to these two pictures. Here's one. So, I don't know. He didn't really describe what it is. I just see a bunch of... So, maybe it's the part of the Ark story, all the different animals, fish. I don't know. I'm not sure. He didn't really describe what it is. And then here's the other one, the sign of the cross. Okay, so getting back to the text. The scientific answer is that the languages are not different. This was recognized as early as 1852 when the revered Charles Foster, the one in the book The One Primeval Language, ably demonstrated that all the ancient languages then deciphered, including early Chinese and other Far Eastern languages, stemmed from one primeval source, thereafter shown to be Sumerian. Similar pictographs had not only similar meanings, which could be a logical coincidence, but also the same multiple meanings and even the same phonetic sounds, which suggests a common origin. More recently, scholars have shown that the very first Egyptian inscriptions employed a language that was indicative of a prior written development. The only place where a written language had a prior development was Sumer. So we have a single written language that, for some reason, was differentiated into three tongues: Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Hamitic, and Indo-European. Such a differentiation could have occurred by itself over time, distance, and geographical separation, yet the Sumerian text claimed that it occurred as a result of a deliberate decision of the gods, once again initiated by Enlil. Sumerian stories on the subject are paralleled by the well-known biblical story of the Tower of Babel, in which we are told, quote, that the whole earth was of one language and of the same words, end quote. But after the people settled in Sumer, learned the art of brickmaking, built cities, and raised high towers, ziggurats. They planned to make for themselves a shem and a tower to launch it. Therefore, quote, did the Lord mingle the earth's tongue, end quote. The deliberate raising of Egypt from under the muddy waters, the linguistic evidence, and the Sumerian and biblical texts support our conclusion that the two satellite civilizations did not develop by chance. On the contrary, they were planned and brought about by the deliberate decision of the Nephilim. Fearing, evidently, a human race unified in culture and purpose, the Nephilim adopted the imperial policy divide and rule. For a while, mankind reached cultural levels that included even airborne efforts, after which, quote, anything they shall scheme to do shall no longer be impossible for them, end quote. The Nephilim themselves were a declining lot. By the third millennium BC, children and grandchildren, to say nothing of humans of divine parentage, were crowding the great olden gods. The bitter rivalry between Enlil and Enki was inherited by their principal sons, and fierce struggles for supremacy ensued. Even the sons of Enlil, as we have seen in earlier chapters, fought among themselves, as did the sons of Enki. As has happened in recorded human history, overlords tried to keep the peace among their children by dividing the land among the heirs. In at least one known instance, one son, Ishkur/Adad, was deliberately sent away by Enlil to be the leading local deity in the mountain land. As time went on, the gods became overlords, each jealously guarding the territory in industry or profession over which he had been given dominion. Human kings were the intermediaries between the gods and the growing and spreading humanity. The claims of ancient kings that they went to war, conquered new lands, or subjugated distant peoples, quote, on the command of my God, end quote, should not be taken lightly. Text after text makes it clear that this was literally so. The gods retained the powers of conducting foreign affairs, for these affairs involved other gods in other territories. Accordingly, they had the final say in matters of war or peace. With the proliferation of people, states, cities, and villages, it became necessary to find ways to remind the people who their particular overlord, or lofty one, was. The Old Testament echoes the problem of having people adhere to their God and not, quote-unquote, prostitute after other gods. The solution was to establish many places of worship and to put up in each of them the symbols and likenesses of the correct gods. The age of paganism began. Following the deluge, the Sumerian texts inform us the Nephilim held lengthy councils regarding the future of gods and man on earth. As a result of these deliberations, they, quote-unquote, created the four regions. Three of them, Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, and the Indus Valley, were settled by man. The fourth region was holy, a term whose original literal meaning was dedicated or restricted. Dedicated to the gods alone, it was a pure land, an area that could be approached only with authorization. Trespassing could lead to quick death by, quote-unquote, awesome weapons, wielded by fierce guards. This land or region was named Til-Mun, literally the place of the missiles. It was the restricted area where the Nephilim had re-established their space base after the one at Sippar had been wiped out by the deluge. Once again, the area was put under the command of Utu/Shamash, the god in charge of the fiery rockets. Ancient heroes like Gilgamesh strove to reach this land of living, to be carried by a shem or an eagle to the heavenly abode of the gods. We recall the plea of Gilgamesh to Shamash, quote, let me enter the land, let me raise my shem, by the life of my goddess mother who bore me, of the pure faithful king, my father, my step direct to the land, end quote. Ancient tales, even recorded history, recall the ceaseless efforts of men to reach the land, find the plant of life, gain eternal bliss among the gods of heaven and earth. This yearning is central to all the religions whose roots lie deep in Sumer, the hope that justice and righteousness pursued on earth will be followed by an afterlife in some heavenly divine abode. But where was this elusive land of the divine connection? The question can be answered. The clues are there, but beyond it loom other questions. Have the Nephilim been encountered since? What will happen when they are encountered again? And if the Nephilim were the gods who created man on Earth, did evolution alone on the 12th planet create the Nephilim? And with that, we are done with this book. And he left us with a little cliffhanger. Who created the Nephilim? That is a very interesting question. So, I think in order to find that out, we're going to have to read his next book, but we're not going to do that right away. I've already decided the next book I'm reading is Forbidden Science. It is another collection of articles from Atlantis Rising. I think it's 36 articles. I'll read as many in a night as I can get through. Depends on how long they are, how dense they are. But yeah, that's what we're going to read next, and I'll be starting that on Friday. So it will be interesting, I think. Let's take a look. I actually have it in hard copy, unlike many of my books that I have in electronic versions now. Forbidden Science. And let's see. Let's just look ahead here at a couple of the articles. I'm not going to read them, but I'll just read the titles. So the first one, Debunking the Debunkers. Do the so-called skeptics have a secret agenda? The second one is Voodoo Science on Trial, challenging the establishment's kangaroo court of alternative science. Then the establishment strikes back. Never mind the evidence. The Learning Channel wants to eradicate the looming Atlantis heresy. And then the fourth one, and this is the last one I'll read, is the Inquisition, the trial of Immanuel Velikovsky. Velikovsky's battle to get his seminal book, Worlds in Collision, published. And I actually want to read Worlds in Collision on this channel at some point. It isn't going to be right away, but I eventually will read that book. So that is what we have to look forward to starting Friday. So yeah. And then I found this J. Douglas Kenyon has also edited about a half a dozen more books. All are articles from Atlantis Rising from over the years on some pretty interesting subjects, and I now have them all on Kindle. So we'll be going through them as well. But first things first, we'll get into this one. So, who's around? Who is around? Ren Flames is playing his loop again. I'm not going to go raid him if he's got a loop going. And that's the only person I follow that's not doing D&D. And Captain Robear seems to always be doing loops these days in D&D. So, and he's got 110 people watching him do a loop of previous broadcasts. So he doesn't need me. So we will call it there. I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much for coming in, Vesper. One of these days I'll learn how to do shout outs, and I will give you one. But I need to learn it and write it down so I know what to type in to do them. But anyway, that's it for tonight. I will see you in the next one.
calling to say I... Calling to say I... calling to say I...